Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the EBI Women in STEM seminar series. With us today, we have Katherine French, the CEO and founder of Bluumbio. Thank you so much for meeting with us today, by the way.
Well, thank you for having me.
First, kudos to you because of all the work you've accomplished in your postdoctoral research at Oxford and Berkeley. But today we are going to be talking more about not only the technology that is either currently being developed or in the process of development, but also taking advice from women in this field like yourself. So now I would like to start with a few technological questions that are extremely simplified for everyone to understand in regards to your work at Bluumbio. So first, what is Bluumbio's focus on energy and biosciences, and how does it combat climate change?
Great question. So I would say in terms of what we do as a company, it's very simple. We're trying to develop new bacteria and plants that can eat toxic chemicals that are in the soil and water around us. At the heart of what we do are enzymes. Enzymes are very small proteins that perform different metabolic functions. Enzymes are found everywhere, right? They help you digest your food. They're found in laundry detergents. They're used to make cheese. So what we do is we look for these enzymes in nature that have properties that are useful to us. So for example, if they can break down crude oil or other chemicals like pesticides, and then we make them work better in the lab. We make them work faster, or we enable them to take on different substrates. So that's essentially what we do. We look for new enzymes, we make them work better, and then we put them into new organisms like bacteria and plants.
Why or where did you get inspired to do this, especially when it comes to enzymes? I feel like that's not something that one talks about a lot in terms of combating climate change. How did you get inspired to create this specific technology?
Another great question. I would say in general, my interest in bioremediation started really when I was a PhD student in England. So probably back around like 2012. I was reading The Guardian one morning, and there was an article on the oil spills in the Niger Delta. And I was really kind of surprised that those spills had been there for well over 30 years and nothing was being done to clean them up. And I felt like this was such an important problem. And I felt at the same time that biology had, some useful tools that could potentially be used to address this issue. So that's really how my interest in this started. And then, given my interest in bioremediation, I came to UC Berkeley in 2018 to Norman Terry's lab. His lab was based in the plant and microbial biology department, which is actually the same building we're in now. And the position that I had at that time was a postdoc position to develop new bioremediation technologies for oil spills. And while I was there, I created a bacteria that could eat crude oil, essentially. So I would say I've definitely had a long-term interest in bioremediation. The reason we focus on enzymes is specifically because that is what does the work. So it's really just going to the heart of the technology.
Okay, and in layman's terms, because I know you explained like enzymes are everywhere and we can, or you are using them in order to become useful in terms of climate change. How does Bluumbio specifically do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so enzymes, if you think about like what is an enzyme, it's a amino acid sequence, and that sequence gives the enzyme its structure, and the structure kind of guides what function it has and how well it performs. If you edit the DNA that is behind that amino acid sequence, the enzyme can take on a new structure, a new conformation, and so you can give that enzyme a new function. So basically, in order to do that, it's almost like, writing a book, editing DNA. So you can change the sequence of the DNA and you end up with a new enzyme. And so that's how essentially we edit the enzymes, and then we develop assays, which we then use to screen them for activity. So we can see are edits beneficial or are they detrimental?
Perfect. And is there a specific reason why Bluumbio isn't widely used yet?
Yeah, so I would say it's partially and actually primarily because we're still in the research and development stage, right? So we're still developing the technology. We do, talk to different potential companies to work with all the time, but essentially we're still developing the technology in the lab.
A startup CEO point of view, what has the journey been in terms of getting funding, or when you had this idea, you were like, okay, I want to use enzymes in order to combat climate change. I want to change your DNA, etc. How was that from that start to the idea to now being able to sustain your research?
Yeah, so I would say in the beginning it was actually quite difficult. I was trying to go down the academic route, so trying to get grants, trying to get um, funding from like NSF, trying to start my own lab. And I was definitely faced with a number of challenges, in part because I do very much applied research. And a lot of research that's out there when you're in academia is really for fundamental research. And definitely fundamental research is great. We definitely use a lot of fundamental research from, previous scientists and experiments and the work that we do now. But we weren't able to get funding. When I decided to, move out of the academic space and try to move into the startup space, then more doors opened. So I applied to Y Combinator, got into Y Combinator, and for people who are wondering what Y Combinator is, it's a startup accelerator that's based in San Francisco, and they provide a bit of seed money to startups to kind of get their idea off the ground, to do some fundamental, experiments, and then they also help you to meet with potential investors and to do fundraising, essentially. So once I went through Y Combinator in their kind of startup school program, I did my seed round of fundraising, and I closed that in November of last year. So I would definitely say it was much easier to get funding for my idea and to start my lab once I moved outside of academia.
Perfect. Also, she forgot to leave out that Y Combinator is extremely difficult to get into, and it's a very, very big deal in the startup world. So congratulations on that.
Thank
And
you.
now moving more into advice-based questions. It can be very difficult to be a woman in the startup industry, especially when it comes to science and research and academia. It can be very difficult, but there are a lot of women, including yourself, that are able to excel in this industry. How would you say you do it?
There's no secret formula, I would say. And I
Yeah.
feel like I've never really experienced any form of, discrimination or unfair treatment just because I was a woman in science. So I can't say that I've experienced that. What I would say is I've definitely met with a lot of, other founders, investors, clients, and they've all been very supportive. So I feel like, potentially the landscape has changed and it's a lot easier. I would say I think this topic has come up in a number of other meetings regarding like women in biotech or women in science or women in the startup world. And I feel like part of it could be that, as women, maybe because we don't see as many women running startups, that we think that there is a barrier. So I do feel like there is definitely an internal part, right? If we don't see a lot of us out there doing this, then we feel like, well, maybe like there are these barriers. But I think once you try something, then you'll actually see like what the barriers are. And definitely I feel like it's not as hard as we think to be a woman in science or a woman running a startup company.
What would you say has motivated you to this day to continue your research? I know you are passionate about it, but as a college student, it's really easy to get burnt out. And at one point, you were a college student that was researching what you're doing now. So how did you get from college to here and feel motivated, or even just in college?
Yeah, definitely. I do remember feeling very burnt out in college, particularly around like exam season, right? But I feel like always keeping like the big picture in mind of what you want to do, whether it's like a stage in life, like you want to own a house or you want to, go to grad school or you want to have this specific job. I think keeping like a big picture is always great. And I think always, no matter what you're studying or what your job is, feeling like motivated and passionate about what you're doing and just finding some, also like fun and curiosity, right? Like work should always be intellectually stimulating. You should be working with people that you enjoy working with. So yes, that's what I would say. Try to keep the big picture in mind and always try to have fun at work.
Perfect. I know you said it was way easier to excel with your idea in the startup culture rather than academia for funding and et cetera to sustain it. Did you have any doubts when you decided to make that switch from academia to startup? And also, did you extensively plan your company and like organize your career path in general, or did it just come naturally, like the opportunities?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say, so in terms of the last part of your question, when you run a startup, you kind of have a big picture in mind of like what your company will do, but it's always changing, right? You might be going down one direction and maybe it's not working. So you do what they say in startup language, which is pivot. So you kind of move in a different direction. So it's definitely sometimes, the day to day can be changing, but the overall goal, kind of set.
Perfect. And when you switched from academia into this industry, were you scared? Did you have any doubts about that, or was it?
Yeah, I think definitely I did because, particularly when you go into Y Combinator, you give up your job. So I left Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and I started working on this startup, and you don't really pay yourself, right? So you're just doing this and you're hoping that it works out. So definitely I was a little worried. I think everyone likes to have a stable job, right? And I think one of my main fears was that, investors wouldn't understand the technology or understand the potential. And that definitely was an unfounded fear. I feel like a lot of the investors that I spoke with, a lot of them actually came from, investing in the sustainability and climate space. So they were aware of like synthetic biology, they knew things about enzymes, and so they understood what I was trying to like convey in our meetings. And I also feel like they definitely saw the potential in terms of investing in sustainable technologies, and technologies that are better for the environment.
What is your overall vision or hopes for Bluumbio and yourself in the future?
Well, I think for my company, I would want us to always be working on trying to tackle the hardest problems, right? So anytime there's a new emerging contaminant, I hope that we'd be, one of the first companies to try to tackle it and obviously develop a solution. And I think for me personally, I've always been passionate about the environment and just trying to do good with science. So I think for me, as long as I can continue doing that, that's enough. I will feel fulfilled.
Aw. Last question. This one's more open-ended, but what would be the one piece of guidance or insight, advice that you would give your younger self and future young women in this industry?
That's another great question.
Mhm.
I feel like my advice is actually very simple. And I think it would be that if you want to do something, just try it. Don't listen to like these voices in your head that say, like, oh, you can't do it, or it's going to be difficult, or you don't know what's going to happen. I think it's always worth giving something a try, whether it's trying a new course or putting in a grant application or putting in a application to grad school or applying for a job. I think you never know what the outcome will be. So as long as you try, you might be pleasantly surprised.
Was there a specific moment that made you think this is good advice? Like, was there a aha moment that you picked this advice?
Not really. I feel like the aha moment is that it's worked for me. I feel like I almost didn't apply to Y Combinator. I felt like I wasn't going to get in. Like I just genuinely felt like I didn't have any chance. And then I applied and then I got in. So I think for me, it was a good lesson where you never know what the outcome is going to be and you can't just write yourself off. So that's why I like to give that advice to people.
Well, thank you so much for meeting with me personally and all of UBI. Very appreciative of your time. We wish you the best of luck with Bluumbio and also with your future endeavors. Thank you all for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe as well as click the bell to be notified for our next interview. Our socials are linked here as well as on our website. If you're interested in climate change, renewable energy, biosciences, and all that comes with that, and also looking to see what career path you would like to take if you're interested in that, we highly recommend checking our socials and website out.